As the world talks about fighting climate change, a lot needs to be done. Food security is a sure way of addressing this, but on a personal level, we can all play our part by embracing change.
The garden behind me is a vertical vegetable garden that's part of a larger project that we're implementing at this point. Maybe I want to go back and tell the story from the very beginning, right? So I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1960. I drive cars, I fly planes, I eat meat, and I have millennial sons. And those millennial sons, when they were teenagers, they were going through that whole story that teenagers go through, knowing everything better than their parents. We've all done that, right? We've all been through that exact same issue with our kids knowing it better. And most of the time, you know, when they grow up, they figure out that, oh, you know what, Dad may not have been all that wrong. But these kids, this generation, the millennials, on one thing, were absolutely spot on. And it was climate change, it was sustainability, it was the fact that we're doing stuff to this planet that will not allow us to survive as humanity.
As the conversation continues to gather momentum, there are others who have gone far and wide to try address this existing problem. In Kenya, there are those who have managed to leave a mark on the fight against climate change.
About a decade ago, I was starting to think about it. So we arrive here in Nairobi, the green city in the sun. And a couple of months later, we're planning a team building exercise. And we end up going to the Mara. There's a marathon there for the elephant projects. And there's a couple of Belgians, a guy called Loic and his wife is called Valerie, who have this most amazing project going on there. They're turning the safari camp that they bought carbon neutral, net zero. And they invited us to come and stay with the whole team. So 40 of us descended on that camp one weekend in December of 2021. And at the end of your stay, what Loic usually does is he shows you around his camp. And he shows you how he's achieved carbon neutrality or net zero-ness. Is that a word? Okay. And he shows you his solar panels and his battery park and his biodigester and his water capture and recycling and his vegetable gardens like this one, like the vertical one. And I was just thinking to myself, wait a minute, this guy has the same infrastructure as I do. He's got 10 tents, he's got 40 people working for him, he's got 3 acres of land, he's got a couple of cars. Me and my embassy, I have 2 buildings, I have 2 cars, I have 20 staff, I have 4 acres of land or 5 acres of land. That's the same infrastructure. We're not in the same business, obviously not. I mean, he's a safari operator, a safari camp operator. Me, I'm an embassy. God knows that those are 2 different things. But the infrastructure is exactly the same. So I said to him, do you think we can copy this? And he said, let me come and take a look. So he came and took a look. And he said, absolutely. You have enough roof space to install the solar panels that will allow you to be completely dependent or to be completely independent from the grid. You have enough space to do your water capture and your water recycling. You also have enough space to do your vertical gardens, and installing a biogas, a biodigester for gas for cooking is easy. So I said, okay, let's do it.
A journey that has taken him 3 months has seen him be self-sufficient, producing his own power, food, and cooking energy.
Last October, we started constructing. We started the retrofit. And we're almost there. We're a couple of weeks away. I think we'll be inaugurating this sometime in April. But yeah, we have the 2 roofs, the house, the residence, and then the office, which is down at the bottom of the garden. The roofs are full of solar panels. They're connected to batteries, which are going to make us independent from the grid. The grid is going to be our backup. You know, in houses like these, usually you have a generator as a backup, which is terrible because it's diesel and it's smelly and it's loud and it's whatever bad you can think about it, it's terrible. Our backup is going to be KPLC, who, by the way, gets its power from the Kenya grid, which is already more than 90% sustainable. So, you know, we're adding to the sustainability of the whole system here. So that's the solar panels and the batteries. And then we have the biodigester where we cook with. You know, in embassy residence, we do stuff. We have lots of functions and parties and people coming over, and the cooking gets done on biogas. And the biogas comes from the vegetables from the kitchen scraps, and also from a local grocer who's giving us his unsold produce. So, you know, and by the way, the unsold produce is already halfway through the biodigester because it's already starting to rot, which is a cool thing. We have 1,000 square meters of roof catching rainwater, and all that rainwater goes into lagoons like this one. You'll see it in a minute. and that water gets recycled and turned into irrigation water for the vegetable garden and for the gardens themselves. So yeah, we're going all the way. By the way, we also bought an electric car. I almost forgot to say that, which of course we're going to charge on our own systems, which are solar.
Food security is an important subject when we talk about climate change. Every government's headache is being able to feed its citizens, especially at a time when we experience extreme weather patterns. But we sure can do something about this.
All the vegetables that you see there, they all get drip irrigated. 2 times 4 minutes a day of drip irrigation is all the water it needs. And oh, by the way, they're not the plants aren't growing in soil. They're growing in volcanic ash, in pumice, so the water filters through and can get recycled. So the 2 times 3 minutes a day, all that water comes back. So it's, we have a herb garden up near the kitchen that has a 50-liter tank. That's all. For all the herbs that I use in my kitchen, I have one 50-liter tank. So drought, bring it.
Fight against climate change cannot be held if there is no recycling being done. Recycling of waste matter, water and others is just one way of making sure that we use and reuse what we already have.
The interesting thing about recycled wastewater is that it has organic matter in it. Even after, as much filtration as you can get, it has some organic matter in it. And that organic matter, what's that? It helps grow. It helps grow the plants. So we use that the recycled wastewater, to grow the plant.
Achieving net zero is a combination of many things: recycling, embracing technology, and going electric mobility. In a country that enjoys sun throughout the year, it's paramount that we try to embrace solar energy to be able to lower our individual carbon print.
KPLC is going to be my backup. I've installed enough battery power to be able to function just on the batteries alone. And the batteries get charged by the sun or by the solar panels. And at night, KPLC keeps charging the batteries. So my batteries are always going to be at 100% in the morning. And in other words, it'll be a minimal amount of usage from KPLC that I'll be using, because most of it will be my own power that I'm using. The more people go off grid, the more stable your network is going to be. Everybody keeps telling me every time the power goes out, it's because the distribution is fragile. Well, take more people off grid. You decrease the fragility of the network. So that's the kind of debates we're having right now.
But why should everyone join in on this journey? Is it worth it embracing solar energy?
Largely for cost reasons. And also because of, like I said, consciousness. My millennial sons made us believe that it's worth doing for the sake of humanity, and that you have to do it at an individual level, and that you have to do what you can at the level of the individual. You can always sit back and say, let the government take care of everything. That's the easy way. Absolutely, that's the easy way out. Implementing the Green Deal, implementing the agreements we have with countries like Kenya on environmental issues. There was something very interesting happened. As we usually do, we prepare this presidency months or years ahead of time, and we then write up a program. And one of the very interesting things that happened in writing up that program was that all my colleagues, when they were looking at the Africa chapter of our presidency program, this was around about the time that President Ruto was making his statements at the Africa Climate Summit, and then in the UN in September. And they took inspiration from President Ruto's statements about how we in the North and our partners here, especially on the African continent, can work together on these issues, and should work together on these issues, while learning the lessons from the past but not obsessing about them, and moving and deciding, both of us, to move forward.
As the conversations around net zero and other forms of climate change initiatives need to be in place, we must all play our part. We must be the change makers and play our part in this conversation. What we did.
Good evening and many thanks for joining us yet again on this edition of Planet Action, your premier #1 show on your television right now that talks about climate. Set today, I have Dr. Githinji. He is well known on this part of Sahara when it comes to issues, health and nutrition. And right now, Daktari, welcome on set. First of all, congratulations on your appointment on scaling up nutrition. But even as we talk about climate change, we realize that the world continues to experience different myriad of diseases because of climate change. Just how do we go about this and make sure that as the world, as Kenya, we are ready for what is to come?
Yeah, I think the challenge of nutrition is a critical challenge. And the reason I say that is because whereas some people may think of nutrition and hunger as an individual problem, it is actually a population level problem. It is a problem of a country's socioeconomic development. Because if you look at nutrition, especially the first 1,000 days of a child, which is what you're referring to, is a foundation on which education is built. If you are not well nourished in your first 1,000 days, then your brain doesn't develop well to build adequate cognitive capacity for you to understand education and to get good quality education and therefore to be prepared for the workplace. So nutrition is critical for a country's socioeconomic development. Kenya has had a problem. Even before this drought, Kenya has had a problem. We've had stunting levels of up to 35% in the past. Now the recent Kenya Health Demographic Survey shows that has dropped to about 18. So it was 35, 24, and I think now it's 18, which is good progress. But that progress is driven largely by, people's socioeconomic development, education of women. When women are more educated, they're more likely to know how to feed their children. Also, they're more likely to find income. So it is actually a real country's development agenda. Now, with the drought that we've seen, it means that these gains of bringing down stunting to 18% as per the current survey is going to be lost. We might actually see stunting going up, especially in those counties. And even when you talk about Kenya having a stunting level of 18%, that's the average. You'll find that in counties where there is drought often, you find that the rates of stunting are much higher. This 18 is the national average. So this drought that we had because of climate change is just going to make these matters worse. And therefore, what we need to do is we need to quickly identify social policies that actually help us to stall the effects of this long-term drought. And that's what really the government needs to work on through the health system, education system. We must protect individuals. And when we protect them, we are protecting them for protecting the country's socioeconomic development and the future.
Now, Dr. Climate change effects continue to cause myriad of challenges in the world right now. In Kenya, we just experienced the worst drought in over 40 years. We talk about stunted growth in children. We talk about women risking their lives to go such. Just how do we make sure that we take care of these demography? Because what is being experienced today will affect them in the years to come.
You see, the first challenge is that I don't think we brought the climate action conversation to human beings. It's been a lot about carbon and carbon emissions. It's not about energy production, fossil fuels. But when you think about it, the reason this is important for us is because of human lives. That's the reason the whole climate action is not important because of industry. It's not important just because of how much carbon goes to the air or how much fuel gets extracted, how much renewable energy we use. All these conversations rotate around better lives. And health and nutrition is really what I would call the human face of the climate action conversation. And that was missing. Even when we went to COP27, we saw that actually, other than industry, the closest we came to human life was agriculture. We didn't see much mention of nutrition and health. But luckily, in COP28, that is going to happen in Dubai, through advocacy and people pushing to ensure that human life is put at the center, the presidency of the COP28 has now included a day on health, which means that health is going to be discussed alongside energy, agriculture, and all these other things, which is good movement. The most important thing is for the world to recognize that the reason we are doing all this is because of human life. Now, once we do that, then we ask ourselves the question, how do we save people's lives and livelihoods? What is the role of the continent of Africa? And the role of the continent of Africa is going to be discussed in the Climate Action Summit, which is being hosted by President Ruto, is to ask ourselves, beyond the impact that is already showing with global warming, because most of us believe that global warming is inevitable. We have seen it, it's already here. It's not something we're waiting for. In fact, if you look at some of the predictions is that the world will not avoid warming beyond 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures. That's inevitable. The question then is, what is the impact? The impact is there's going to be rising ocean seas, water levels. There's going to be increased drought. There's going to be extreme weather events. And when there is water rising, it's not just water rising, it's displacing people where they are. It is actually creating more salty water for people to drink. Therefore, people are going to be affected by salty water in countries that are at low level. It is increasing the way malaria patterns are going to be. It's, the global warming is going to make sure malaria goes up to warmer areas that were originally cold and had no malaria. What we say now in Kenya, we say malaria is likely to be in the western Nyanza regions. It's going to be in central Kenya and everywhere else because of the warming. It is going to affect the food patterns, it's going to affect water scarcity, energy. All these things are going to be affected. So the question for Africa is, what's our role? On one side, how do we help reduce the global warming? And how do we help countries achieve their global warming targets or the reduction of global warming targets? We can do that by using our diversity. Africa is diverse. We have a lot of trees. We have, geothermal. We have all these things. So we can actually increase our renewable energy and help other countries. And we can use our forest cover to absorb more carbon so that we reduce the carbon emissions. But on the other side, there's an agenda of adaptation. Because the global warming is happening, how do we ensure health systems are protected? How do we ensure that people are protected against the drought and there is food available? Who is going to fund the school feeding programs for the children who are poor? Who is going to feed the improvement of water sources for people? Who is going to actually ensure that all the impacts of this warming are reduced? And that's the adaptation agenda, even as Africa supports the world in reduction of carbon emissions through its forest cover. So these are the questions that need to come to the center. And we are hoping that the summit that happens in Nairobi and the COP28 in Dubai is actually going to bring human life at the center of the conversation.
Now, Daktari, as we talk about climate change, we have different diseases that continue to be associated with climate change. Let's talk about Ebola, we talk about COVID-19 and other disasters that we expect will come due to this problem that we face. So how do we get prepared as a country, as the world, because this is here with us as we speak?
The first thing to say is that we are not prepared. That's important to know. We are not prepared. The conditions that led us to COVID-19 are still the same that we are living under. Nothing really has changed. The second thing to say is that we know that disease outbreaks, climate-related health emergencies are increasing. WHO says that in the last 20 years, actually about maybe 15 years, the climate-related emergencies have increased by more than 25%. Actually, out of all the health emergencies reported by WHO, 56% are climate-related. 150,000 people die annually because of climate-related, health issues. So we know the issue is there. Now the question is, in every country, there's a health system. That health system is expecting these emergencies to continue. Some of those include, like Malawi, has had its longest ever cholera outbreak. Kenya is actually also facing almost one of its longest ever cholera outbreaks in some of the countries. The question then, what must we do in the health system? Because we know there is a reality. What must we do to protect the health system and protect the people, even as we wait for the tide to change on global warming? The first thing is to have early warning systems. Early warning systems mean that the health system and the Ministry of Health must work with the Meteorology Department, must work with agriculture. They must work together as multi-sectoral approaches to say, for example, what are the patterns of outpatient attendance, and what are the patterns of malaria related to the temperature changes, which are tracked by the Meteorological Department? How is it that this new malaria, Stephensi, how is it moving? What are the patterns based on temperature? Those are early warning systems. How do we use community health workers to identify changes in their communities where they are? Like when you see maybe a community health worker can notice something very simple. They can notice there are more children with fever in the last 1 week than before, and send that signal up, and then the health system realizes there could be an outbreak coming out of there. How do you notice, how do you actually track possible extreme weather events that are likely to create flooding and identify the areas of flooding and map the water and sanitation systems there, and actually through artificial intelligence, you can tell there's likely to be a cholera outbreak. And then what do? You transfer cholera vaccines and you use them preventively in that region so that you don't have cholera outbreaks. This is what the health system needs to do. Early warning systems, disease surveillance, and then prepare itself to the response ahead of the extreme weather events. But that requires the health system to be part of the conversation. You'll be surprised now that not in many countries in Africa have the Ministry of Health or the Minister of Health in the Climate Cabinet Committee, because it's never been seen as a health issue. It's been seen as an environment issue, energy issue, financing issue, agriculture. Now we are working together with the Ministries of Health, including our own ministry in Kenya and WHO, to ensure that the Ministers of Health and the Ministries of Health are included in the policy dialogues on climate change. Once we do that, the next step is to say, now that we have the Ministries of Health, the technical people in these ministries will be able to guide and say, these are the key areas, like I've talked about, that we need to focus on. Those areas then will be made part of the country's commitments in what we call the nationally determined contributions. So this country, Kenya, is going to focus on the following things: mitigating climate change, but also adapting, and health, disease surveillance, early warning systems, mapping, whatever, eliminating malaria are going to be part of the conversation. So that's the way we need to go.
Now, Daktari, climate change causes two things. Now we have food shortage and we have water shortage. In other areas, we have loads of water that they don't need. Other places we have fresh water, but it is flooding, killing plants. So how do we have these conversations, and how do we get ready in making sure that we have food, that people are able to go through their businesses as normal moving forward?
Yeah, the conversation on agriculture and climate change and drought and all this is a complex one. On one side is about moving away from rain-fed agriculture, which means that then there have been public goods that have been invested in by the government to redistribute water. That means that irrigation systems must be a government priority, not individual farmer priority. You know, if the government didn't build the grid for electricity, nobody can afford to pull the grid and then pull the electricity house. The government needs to build large-scale, irrigation systems. If you look at the history of Italy, for example, the Roman Empire, they were built on water distribution. They moved, what were called aquifers. From very far, they would distribute the water. And even if you go there now, you find water points for people to drink because there's water underground everywhere. This redistribution needs to be a public good. Then people can now get the water and irrigate their farms wherever they are. So the first thing is there needs to be policies to shift away from rain-fed agriculture, and they need to be large scale. The next thing is the conversation around science and regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture, more research and development in terms of which plants and foods grow where, and how do you support them? How do you renew the soil? How do you use technology that is now being used to renew the soil so that you have better outcome and better products and produce from the plants? So research and development as part of regenerative agriculture is important. The next point is about nutrition as a health investment, as a social development investment, that we need to revisit school feeding programs. And the school feeding programs, because as we said, the first 1,000 days are the most critical for a child. School feeding programs at early childhood development, early primary school, must be, again, a major investment of government, because that is where the most critical investment is needed to avoid stunting and to produce A-class citizens that can go to school and then economically develop the country. So school feeding is critical as a policy. Health system, and school feeding is actually related to the health system. Because when you feed kids in school, you also reduce diarrhea, because malnutrition is very closely related to diarrhea and malaria. Remember that also pregnant women are part of the feeding program for children, because if a mother is undernourished during her pregnancy, they're most likely to deliver a child who is, who has low birth weight. So all these things are related: maternal health, nutrition, child health, schooling, agriculture, regenerative agriculture, moving away from rain-fed agriculture. So it's not a health system issue, it's not an agriculture issue, it's not an education issue, it is a country's socio-economic development issue, which needs presidential leadership and needs policy, but not only policy, but action. And in that is community mobilization for them to be part of this and to understand what's going on. So we have a lot of work to do.
Nature has a rule that creates a balance. Wildlife and humans are meant to be in their own habitats. Human destruction of nature has led to climate change, which in itself brings its own risks to humans, plants, and animals. Here are some of the diseases and conditions that we are now grappling with as nature fights back. Coronaviruses is a large family of viruses that affects large mammals and birds. However, they're easily transmitted to humans, where they cause respiratory diseases. These conditions range from mild colds to severe ones. Animals such as camels, pigs, large cats, and even wild birds are known to host these viruses. The coronavirus disease that broke out in 2019 is the worst of its kind. This is why it was called COVID-19. It is still ranked as a new disease. Rabies. This is a viral disease affecting the nervous system. While it is 100% fatal, it can be prevented through vaccination. However, undomesticated animals, including wild dogs and bats here in Africa, are known common carriers of the virus. But human encroachment into the habitat of these animals is solely to blame for the spread of the disease. Bacteria and viruses are common causes and catalysts of infections that affect human beings. On their part, fungi have been known to be responsible for minor health issues. This is because the human body temperature is not conducive for fungal survival. But as temperatures continue rising, pathogenic fungi, which causes diseases in humans and animals, are expected to be more deadly. According to a recent research by Duke University in Carolina, some of the fungi that could turn deadly include Candida auris and Candida albicans. These two are responsible for the rising cases of candidiasis disease. As environmental degradation continues, extreme weather conditions may be witnessed. Floods and droughts are now becoming more and more common as El Nino and La Nina phenomena persists. The Southern African region has been hit by devastating tropical cyclones in the recent years. These calamities have led to high cases of displacements, with more communities being uprooted from their homes. Waterborne diseases like cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever, E. coli, salmonellosis, among others, are now rising to crisis levels. On the other hand, droughts have led to food shortages, leading to malnutrition. A huge number of children are experiencing stunted growth, especially here in Africa. Conflicts are now being reported in many parts of the continent as communities scramble for the little but dwindling available resources. This means more humanitarian crises. With the rising cases of natural calamities like flood, mudslides, wildfires, and diseases, the number of people living with mental illnesses could rise. Most of these people could be suffering from loss of their loved ones and property, and the anxiety occasioned by the fear of the next round of disasters. There are those who might find it hard to pick up broken pieces of their lives. With Africa and Kenya's failure to invest in mental health policies and structures and legal frameworks, it may be an overwhelming situation for states and governments. While some of these issues are already being witnessed, it is fair to be aware that if we let nature be a once-upon-a-time occurrence, we may not live to witness it. It will have destroyed us. It is just fair to know this.